The mansion was buzzing with activity. It was the kind of extravagant event where the rich mingled, laughing and chatting with expensive drinks in their hands, while the staff quietly moved about, making sure everything was in perfect order. The grand hall was decked out in gold and silver decorations, chandeliers hanging from the ceiling like sparkling jewels. It was a scene of opulence and wealth, the kind of place where the ordinary didn't belong. Among the well-dressed guests was a girl who clearly didn't fit in. She wore a simple black dress and her hair was tied back neatly, a few strands escaping to frame her face. She was one of the waitstaff, carrying trays of champagne with a polite smile as she moved from guest to guest. She was quiet, never speaking unless spoken to. She wasn't used to this world of glamour and luxury, and honestly, she didn't feel like she belonged in it either. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the tray, careful not to spill anything. The billionaire hosting the event was a man who had made his fortune in business and now saw himself as untouchable. His reputation for being tough and slightly ruthless was well known. He had always considered himself above others, especially those who worked for him. His eyes scanned the room, looking for any opportunity to entertain himself, to show just how much control he had over the people around him. Then, his gaze landed on the girl. She was standing in the corner of the room, holding a tray of drinks, her eyes lowered, focusing on her task. For some reason, the billionaire found himself curious about her. It wasn't because of her beauty, though she was certainly pretty in a quiet way, but because she seemed so out of place, so unimportant in his eyes. It made him feel powerful. So, he decided to have a little fun. With a sly smile, he called over to one of his friends who was laughing with a group of other guests. "Hey," he said loudly, "there's a piano over there. Let's see if our friend can play something. I bet she can't even play chopsticks." His friends chuckled, looking over to the girl. They all shared a moment of amusement, waiting for her reaction. She looked up, startled by the sudden attention, but said nothing. The billionaire's voice grew louder as he addressed her directly. "You," he said with a smirk, "play something on that piano. Show us what you can do." The girl froze, her heart racing. She had never expected anything like this. She wasn't prepared to perform for anyone, especially not in front of all these important people. She had always kept her talents hidden. Music was something personal, something she had once loved but had to set aside when life had gotten in the way. She never imagined a night like this, standing in front of a grand piano in a mansion full of wealthy strangers. But now, the spotlight was on her. The billionaire was watching her, waiting for her to either prove him wrong or embarrass herself. The guests were quiet, all eyes on her, the room thick with expectation. The pressure was suffocating. For a moment, the girl considered walking away, disappearing into the kitchen, or finding a quiet corner where no one could see her. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the thought of being dismissed so easily, or maybe it was the stubborn part of her that didn't want to be laughed at. She had worked too hard and had too much to lose to let this man think she was nothing more than a joke. So she walked toward the piano, her feet heavy on the marble floor. She sat down slowly, her fingers brushing the keys as she prepared herself. She didn't look at anyone. She focused on the instrument, closing her eyes for a moment to calm herself. The piano was grand and imposing, the keys gleaming under the soft light of the chandelier. Her fingers hovered above them, uncertain at first. She wasn't used to playing for an audience. But then, she took a deep breath and began. The first few notes were soft, tentative, but as the music flowed through her fingers, something shifted. The nervousness that had gripped her melted away, replaced by the familiar rhythm of the music she had once loved. She played effortlessly, the piece growing more complex and beautiful with every note. It was a song she had learned years ago, before life had become so overwhelming. It was the song she used to play when she was alone, lost in the world of melody and emotion. The guests in the room were silent. The billionaire's smirk faded as he watched, his initial amusement turning into surprise. He had expected something simple, something awkward. Instead, he was hearing a performance that was anything but amateur. The girl's hands moved gracefully across the keys, her fingers dancing with a precision that spoke of years of practice. She played with passion, the music rising and falling like a storm, filling the room with its power. The billionaire felt his pride start to slip away. He had thought this would be an easy joke, a way to mock someone he considered beneath him. But now he was the one who felt small. He couldn't look away, his eyes fixed on the girl as she played, her talent undeniable. The other guests, too, were captivated. They had expected to see a poor, unremarkable girl embarrass herself, but instead they were witnessing something extraordinary. The girl, who had been nothing more than a servant in their eyes, had just proven that she was far more than they had ever imagined. When the last note echoed through the room, there was a brief moment of silence. The billionaire's mouth hung open, his expression frozen. He had been so sure of himself, so certain that he could control the situation. But in that moment he was nothing. The girl had shown him that his wealth and power meant nothing in the face of true talent. The applause came slowly at first, hesitant, as if the guests were unsure of what to do. But soon it grew louder, more enthusiastic. The girl stood up from the piano, her cheeks flushed and her heart still racing. She didn't know what to do. She didn't expect anyone to clap, didn't expect anyone to care. But there they were, clapping, some even standing in admiration. The billionaire stood frozen, his mind racing. He had been humiliated and he didn't know how to process it. The girl had proven him wrong, and the power he had always felt was slipping away. But the girl didn't wait for him to speak. She walked calmly away from the piano, leaving behind the stunned crowd and the rich, arrogant man who had thought he could use her for his amusement. As she returned to her duties, her heart still pounding, she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The night had started with a cruel challenge, but now she had proven that she was more than just a servant. She was someone who, when given the chance, could shine. The applause slowly faded, but the atmosphere in the grand hall remained charged, like the air just before a thunderstorm. The guests were still whispering to each other, their eyes wide with amazement. They had all been so sure that the girl would falter, that she would give in to the pressure and fail in front of them. But instead they had witnessed something extraordinary. They had witnessed her talent, something that had been hidden from the world, now revealed in its full glory. The girl, however, didn't stay to bask in the attention. She had played her heart out, and while the applause had warmed her, she wasn't here for the praise. She wasn't here to prove anything to them. As soon as the music had stopped, she quietly stood up from the piano and made her way back to the side of the room, where she had been standing before. Her face was calm, but inside her heart was still racing. She hadn't planned for this moment. The music had come to her naturally, a reflex, something she could do without thinking. But as the final note had echoed through the room, something had changed. She had stepped into the spotlight, and now the eyes of everyone in the room were on her. She could feel their stares, their judgments, but she refused to look back. She didn't need their approval. The billionaire, on the other hand, was still standing by the piano, his expression unreadable. He had expected this evening to go a certain way. He had planned to make her the joke of the party, to humiliate her in front of his guests. But instead she had taken that moment and turned it into her own. His smirk had long since disappeared, replaced by a look of something closer to disbelief. He had always been the one in control. People listened when he spoke, they obeyed when he commanded. His wealth and influence had always been his greatest tools. And yet in one swift moment this girl had shown him that there was something far more powerful than money or status. There was raw, unbridled talent. He watched her as she moved through the crowd, quietly returning to her duties. She was back to being a waitress again, carrying trays and serving drinks, but something had changed. Her presence in the room was different now. The guests were no longer just seeing her as another worker, another face in the crowd. They were seeing her as someone with value, someone who had something more to offer than just a smile and a tray of drinks. The billionaire, still grappling with the shock of the situation, finally approached her. He moved slowly through the crowd, unsure of what he was even going to say. Part of him wanted to pretend that nothing had happened, to laugh it off and move on. But another part of him, a part he didn't fully understand, felt a strange pull toward her. Something about her performance had stirred something in him, a feeling he hadn't felt in years. He had always been used to controlling everything around him, but for the first time he didn't feel like the one in charge. He finally reached her, standing just a few feet away. She was filling drinks at the bar, her back to him. She didn't seem to notice him approach, and for a brief moment he wondered if she even remembered the moment they shared in front of the piano. But then she turned and their eyes met. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She simply looked at him as if she had known this conversation was coming. "Impressive one," he said, his voice soft, almost hesitant. He wasn't used to speaking this way, unsure of his words. "I didn't expect that." The girl didn't respond right away. She simply nodded, her expression calm but distant. She wasn't looking for validation, and she didn't need his praise. She had done what she came here to do, and now she was ready to move on. But she knew better than to show her indifference too openly. She had learned the hard way that people like him didn't like to be ignored, especially when they were trying to assert their dominance. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice steady, not revealing too much emotion. "But I'm just doing my job." The billionaire was taken aback by her response. He had expected her to be flattered, to thank him for the opportunity to play in front of such an important crowd. But instead, she had dismissed him with just a few words. It was almost as if she didn't care about his approval, and that made him even more intrigued. "You don't have to pretend," he said, his tone softer now. "I know you're not just a waitress. You're more than that." She met his gaze, her eyes steady and unwavering. "And you don't have to pretend that you don't know exactly what I am," she replied, her voice calm but firm. The billionaire blinked, unsure of how to respond. He had expected a different reaction, something more submissive, more in line with the way he was used to people acting around him. But instead, this girl, this quiet, unassuming girl, had spoken to him like no one ever had. And for a brief moment he felt something he hadn't felt in years: humility. He didn't want to admit it, but he was beginning to see her in a different light. She wasn't just a servant, a nobody. She was someone with a hidden depth, someone who could command the attention of a room without saying a word. And he had underestimated her. The girl didn't wait for him to say anything else. She turned back to her duties, pouring another drink for a guest who had just arrived at the bar. The billionaire stood there for a moment, watching her work, his mind racing. He had never been the kind of man who thought much about other people's feelings, but this girl had made him reconsider everything. He had always thought of himself as the one in control, but now he wasn't so sure. As the night went on, the billionaire couldn't shake the image of her sitting at the piano, her fingers moving over the keys with such ease, such grace. The music had filled the room with an energy he had never expected, and he found himself replaying it in his mind over and over. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that she had something he could never buy, something that no amount of wealth could ever give him. He began to wonder about her story, about who she really was. Who was this girl who had walked into his mansion and taken control of the room with a single performance? What else had she hidden from everyone else? He couldn't stop himself from asking those questions, even though he knew he had no right to. For the first time in a long time, the billionaire felt something like curiosity. He had never cared about people like her before, had never bothered to know anything about them. But now he found himself wanting to understand her, to learn about the person behind the quiet exterior. And that in itself was a shift. The evening wore on, and the mood in the mansion began to shift. The guests were still talking about the unexpected performance. The music had lingered in the air, leaving a subtle energy that no one could quite shake off. But while the party continued around her, the girl was doing her best to stay out of the spotlight. She had played her part, and now she was going back to the quiet corners of the room, refilling drinks, serving appetizers, and avoiding any more attention. But no matter how hard she tried to slip into the background, she could feel the eyes on her. Whispers followed her wherever she went. The people who had been so focused on their own conversations were now looking at her differently. They were no longer seeing just a girl in a black dress carrying trays. They were seeing someone with talent, with depth, someone who had revealed a side of herself they had never expected. The billionaire watched her from a distance. He hadn't stopped thinking about her performance. The music was still in his mind, the way her fingers had moved across the keys with such ease, such emotion. He wasn't used to feeling this way, curious, uncertain. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he didn't have all the answers, and it bothered him. As he looked around the room, he saw that the other guests were still talking about her too. Some of them were wondering who she was, what her story was, while others were commenting on how surprising it was that someone like her could have such skill. The billionaire could sense that the girl was no longer invisible. She had caught everyone's attention, and in a room full of people who prided themselves on their status, that was no small feat. But the girl didn't seem to notice the change. She was focused on her work, moving around the room as if nothing had happened. Her steps were quick, efficient, but her face remained composed, almost unreadable. She wasn't looking for recognition. She wasn't interested in the attention. It was clear to anyone who had been watching her closely that her performance hadn't been about impressing anyone. It had been about something else, something that even she didn't fully understand. The billionaire found himself getting more and more frustrated. He couldn't stop thinking about the way she had sat at that piano, the way the music had poured out of her like it was second nature. He had been trying to figure out who she was, but the more he tried, the more he realized that he had no idea. She was a mystery, one that he wanted to solve. As the night went on, he found himself seeking her out again and again. He watched her as she moved through the crowd, her back straight, her eyes focused on her work. She didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge him. It was as if she was purposely avoiding him, and that only made him more determined to understand her. Finally, as the evening was winding down, the billionaire found a moment when she wasn't busy serving guests. She was standing by the window, looking out at the garden, her arms crossed over her chest. The soft light from the chandeliers cast a warm glow over her, and for a moment, she seemed like someone completely different, someone out of place in this extravagant world of wealth and privilege. The billionaire walked over to her slowly, not wanting to startle her. He stood beside her for a moment, looking out at the view, unsure of what to say. There was something about this moment that felt different from all the others. The music was still lingering in the air, and the tension between them was palpable. Finally, she spoke, her voice calm and steady. "You don't have to keep watching me," she said, her eyes still fixed on the garden outside. "I've already done what you wanted." The billionaire blinked, caught off guard. He had expected her to be more nervous, more eager for approval. But instead she was calm, composed, as if she had already moved on from the night's events. "I wasn't watching you," he replied, his voice quiet. "I was just trying to understand." She turned to face him, her gaze steady. "Understand what?" He hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to put his thoughts into words. "Understand who you are," he said finally. "You're not just some waitress. You're not just someone who works for a living. You've got something else, something more." She regarded him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "And why does that matter?" she asked. The question caught him off guard. He had expected her to say something about being grateful, about wanting recognition, but instead she was asking him why it mattered to him at all. It was a question that made him pause, made him think about the way he had been viewing her. He had been treating her like a puzzle, something to figure out, something to own. But now he realized that maybe she wasn't something to be understood or controlled. Maybe she was someone with her own story, someone who didn't need his approval to be who she was. "I don't know," he admitted after a long pause. "I guess I've never met anyone like you before." "I've never met anyone who could make me feel like this." She raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued but not fooled. "Like what?" "Like I don't have everything figured out," he said, his voice softer now. "Like I'm not the one who controls everything." She nodded slowly, as if she understood exactly what he was saying. "It's not about control," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "It's about knowing who you are, what you want. If you can't do that, then you'll always feel like you're chasing something." The billionaire stood still, his mind racing. She had a point. He had always been the one in control, the one who made the rules, who called the shots. But now he was beginning to understand that there was more to life than power and control. There was something deeper, something he had been missing. For a moment they stood there in silence, the sounds of the party muffled in the background. The night had shifted and the dynamic between them had changed. The girl had given him a glimpse into something he had never seen before. A world beyond the walls of wealth and power. A world where talent, passion, and truth mattered more than status. Finally, the girl spoke again, her voice gentle but resolute. "I don't need your help," she said. "I don't need anyone's approval. I don't need anything from you." The billionaire nodded slowly, understanding her words more than he expected. He had spent his life building an empire, surrounding himself with people who wanted something from him, who sought his approval. But here, in this moment, he realized that there was someone who didn't need any of that, someone who was strong enough to stand on her own. "I get it," he said quietly, feeling a strange sense of respect for her. "You don't need anything from me, but if you ever want to talk, if you ever want anything, I'll be fine," she interrupted gently, offering him a small, knowing smile. "You don't have to worry about me." The billionaire stood there for a moment watching her, feeling a shift inside him. She had made him realize that control wasn't everything, that power wasn't the answer. There was more to life than what he had been chasing, more to people than what he had assumed. As he walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that this night, this moment, had changed something in him. And somehow he knew that he would never be the same. The days following the party were strange. The billionaire couldn't stop thinking about the girl and her performance. He tried to push the thought out of his mind, tried to focus on his usual routine, but it lingered like a quiet hum in the back of his thoughts. He was used to being in control, to making the rules, to having everything go the way he wanted. But the girl had done something he couldn't quite grasp. She had exposed a side of him that he didn't even know existed. Meanwhile, the girl continued with her life as if nothing had changed. She returned to her job, doing the same tasks she always did, moving through the world with quiet grace. She wasn't seeking attention, wasn't looking for recognition. Her music was something she had kept hidden for so long, a part of herself she had buried deep down. But now, after that night, it felt like that part of her had been awakened. She had always been careful about who knew about her talent. Music had been her passion when she was younger, something that brought her joy and peace. But life had other plans. The demands of family, the need to survive, had pushed her dreams aside. She had learned to live without them, to focus on getting by, to focus on what was practical. The girl knew that the world she lived in wasn't a place where dreams and passions were given room to grow. She had learned that the hard way. People like her, people who came from nothing, didn't get to chase their dreams. They worked, they struggled, and they survived. That was all. So she had learned to let go of those dreams. She had let the music fade into the background of her life, something she did only when no one was around to hear. But that night, when she sat at the piano and let the music take over, something had shifted inside her. It wasn't just the performance that had changed things. It was the way the crowd had reacted, the way they had stopped to listen, the way they had seen her as something more than just a waitress. For the first time in years, she had felt seen. She had felt recognized, even if just for a moment. And now, every time she returned to the kitchen, every time she served a drink, she felt the weight of those eyes on her. The billionaire's eyes. She could feel his gaze on her, and she wasn't sure how she felt about it. She wasn't used to being looked at like that, with curiosity and interest. She didn't know what he wanted from her. But part of her wondered if he even knew what he wanted himself. One day, after a week had passed, the girl found herself walking through the lobby of the mansion again. She was bringing fresh drinks to the guests, her tray carefully balanced in her hands. As she moved past the grand piano, she hesitated for a moment, a memory of the night flashing through her mind. The music, the way the notes had filled the air. She felt the pull again, the need to play. But she quickly pushed the thought away. She wasn't here to play for anyone, certainly not for people who didn't understand what it meant. As she walked toward the bar, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned and saw the billionaire approaching, his hands tucked into his pockets. He wasn't smiling, but there was something in his eyes that she couldn't quite place. He had been avoiding her since that night, staying in his corner of the mansion while she worked quietly in hers. But today something had changed. "You're here again," she said, trying to sound indifferent as she set down the tray of drinks. The billionaire nodded, taking a slow step closer. "I wanted to talk to you," he said, his voice softer than usual. She looked at him for a moment, her brow furrowing slightly. "Talk about what?" she asked, not sure where this conversation was going. He hesitated, his eyes flickering over her face before he spoke again. "About that night," he said. "About your music." Her chest tightened slightly at the mention of it. She wasn't sure if she wanted to talk about it. Music had been her escape, her refuge. It wasn't something she wanted to discuss with someone like him, someone who had everything, someone who had no idea what it was like to work for every single thing. "I don't think there's much to talk about," she replied, her voice steady but her heart pounding in her chest. "I played. That's all." "But it's more than that," he said, stepping a little closer, his voice earnest. "I've seen a lot of things in my life, but I've never seen someone play like that. I've never seen anyone put so much into something. You didn't just play music, you—" He trailed off, trying to find the right words. "You felt it. You made everyone else feel it." She didn't know how to respond to that. The truth was, he was right. She had put everything into that performance. She had let the music take over, let it carry her away. But she had done it because she had to. She had done it because, for a moment, she wasn't just a waitress. For a moment, she was someone with a gift. "I don't know what you want from me," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I don't need anything from you." He looked at her, his gaze softening. "I'm not asking for anything," he said. "I just want to understand. You don't have to keep hiding. You don't have to keep running from it." She looked away, staring at the floor for a moment, her hands clenched at her sides. "You don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't go back to that life. I can't go back to pretending that everything is fine when it's not. Music is a dream that doesn't pay the bills. Music doesn't feed people. It doesn't help you survive. It's something I used to love, something that used to make me happy, but it's not a reality anymore." The billionaire didn't say anything for a moment. He just stood there watching her as she spoke. He could see the pain in her eyes, the way she fought to hold back the emotions that were threatening to spill over. He understood what she was saying, more than he wanted to admit. He knew what it was like to have dreams crushed, to have to give up the things that mattered most because the world wouldn't let you keep them. But something in him wouldn't let her give up just yet. "You don't have to give it up," he said quietly, his voice gentle. "You don't have to stop doing what you love. There's more than one way to make your dreams happen." The girl shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "You don't get it," she said. "Dreams don't just happen because you want them to. They don't come true because someone tells you they will. But what if they could?" he asked, his eyes intense. "What if you had the chance to pursue them, to do something with your talent? What if you didn't have to hide anymore?" For a moment she said nothing. She stood there, her heart pounding, her mind racing. She had buried her dreams for so long that the thought of bringing them to the surface again felt almost impossible. But maybe, just maybe, there was something in his words that spoke to her. Maybe there was a chance, a small one, to finally chase what she had put aside for so long. "I don't know," she said quietly, her voice filled with doubt. "I don't know if I can." The billionaire reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the bar toward her. "If you ever change your mind, if you ever want to talk, I'm here," he said. She looked at the card for a moment, then back at him. Something in his eyes told her he was serious. And for the first time in a long time, she considered the possibility of something more than just surviving. "Thank you," she said, taking the card. Though she wasn't sure if she would ever use it. She wasn't sure if she was ready for what it represented. He nodded, giving her one last look before he turned and walked away. And as the girl stood there, holding the card in her hand, she felt a mixture of fear and hope stirring inside her. Maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to make her dreams come true. Maybe this was the beginning of something new. Days passed and life seemed to return to its usual rhythm for the girl. She went back to her job, working quietly, keeping to herself and avoiding any further attention. She hadn't told anyone about the card the billionaire had given her, or the conversation that had taken place after that night. It was something she hadn't fully processed yet, something that felt like it didn't belong in her world. She kept the card tucked away in her pocket, not ready to throw it away, but also not ready to act on it. It was just a business card, a piece of paper with a name and a number, but something about it made her hesitate. It represented more than just a potential opportunity. It represented the dreams she had buried so long ago. Dreams she had long convinced herself were out of reach. She wasn't sure if she was ready to bring them to the surface, to let them see the light of day again. The world she lived in wasn't one where dreams were easily achieved. Dreams didn't pay the rent, didn't buy groceries, didn't fix everything that was wrong. But as the days went by, the music from that night lingered in her mind. The feeling of the keys beneath her fingers, the way the notes seemed to flow through her without thinking, the way the room had fallen silent as she played. It was a memory that wouldn't let go. She had never played for anyone like that before, and for the first time in years she had felt something that resembled hope. And the billionaire's words echoed in her thoughts. What if you didn't have to hide anymore? It wasn't just about the music anymore. It was about what it had made her feel. For a moment she wasn't invisible. For a moment she was seen. And maybe, just maybe, there was a way to make that a reality again. One afternoon, when the sky outside was painted in soft hues of pink and gold, the girl found herself standing in front of the piano again. The restaurant was empty. The staff scattered around cleaning, and the world outside was quiet. It was a rare moment of solitude, a moment where she could finally allow herself to think. She walked over to the piano, her fingers lightly brushing over the keys as if greeting an old friend. She hesitated for only a second, then sat down, feeling the familiar weight of the bench beneath her. She began to play. At first, it was just the simple melody she had played that night, the one that had filled the mansion with music. But then, as her fingers moved, she began to improvise, letting the music guide her. She let go of everything, the doubts, the worries, the fears, and just played. For the first time, she was playing not for anyone else, but for herself. The notes flowed effortlessly, each one carrying a piece of her heart. She lost track of time, lost track of everything but the music. It felt like freedom, like she was finally letting go of the chains she had placed on herself all those years ago. When she finally stopped, she didn't know how much time had passed. Her fingers were still tingling, the sound of the piano still echoing in her mind. She took a deep breath, looking at the keys for a moment before standing up. She felt lighter, as though the weight of the world had lifted just a little. But then the reality set in again. She couldn't just let this be a fleeting moment. She couldn't pretend like nothing had changed. The thought of using the Billionaire's card flickered in her mind again. She had been avoiding it for days, but now the idea didn't seem so impossible. Maybe she had been running from it because she was afraid. Afraid of failure, afraid of being disappointed, afraid that even with the opportunity, she would still find herself stuck in the same place. But deep down she knew she couldn't keep running. She couldn't keep hiding from the one thing that made her feel alive. It was time to take a chance. Time to do something for herself. That evening, after a long shift, she found herself alone in her small apartment. The card sat on the counter just as it had been since that night. She stared at it for a long time, her hand hovering over it as if she could feel the weight of the decision in her fingers. Finally, with a deep breath, she picked it up and dialed the number on the back. The phone rang twice before a voice answered. Hello? She hesitated, unsure of what to say. Hi, I'm calling about the card you gave me, the night of the party. There was a pause on the other end, and then he spoke again, his voice warm and familiar. I remember. I'm glad you called. For a moment, she wasn't sure how to continue. She had expected this to be harder, but it felt strangely comforting to hear his voice again. I'm not sure what I'm asking for, she said, her voice quiet but steady. I'm just trying to figure out what comes next. I understand, he replied. You don't have to have everything figured out. But you don't have to do this alone either. Her heart skipped a beat at his words. She wasn't used to people offering help without expecting something in return. She had always learned to rely on herself, to keep moving forward no matter what. But something about his offer felt different. Maybe this time it wouldn't be about surviving. Maybe this time it could be about living. What do you want me to do? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I want you to take a chance, he said. You've got something special, and I can help you get to where you want to be. I'm not offering you a dream, I'm offering you a path, a way forward. She paused, her thoughts spinning. Was this it? Was this the chance she had been waiting for? Was she ready to take that first step into the unknown? I'm listening, she said finally, her voice strong and sure. And from that moment on, everything began to change. Over the next few weeks, the girl worked hard, pushing herself to overcome her doubts and fears. The billionaire kept his word, offering her opportunities she never could have imagined. He introduced her to people in the music world, people who could help her hone her skills, people who could help her get her foot in the door. Slowly, she began to take her music seriously again. Slowly, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, her dreams weren't as impossible as she had once thought. Her first public performance was a small one, just a few friends and family in a cozy, intimate venue. But for her, it was everything. As she stood in front of the audience, her heart racing, she realized that she wasn't just playing for them. She was playing for herself. She was finally doing what she had always wanted to do. The applause that followed was louder than anything she had expected. The faces in the crowd were filled with admiration, but it was the feeling inside her that mattered most. She had done it. She had taken that leap, and now there was no turning back. As the night ended and the crowd filtered out, the billionaire approached her, a proud smile on his face. You did it, he said. She smiled back, a feeling of gratitude and joy flooding her chest. I couldn't have done it without you, he shook his head. No, you did it yourself. I just gave you the push you needed. And with that, she knew that her journey had only just begun. She had taken the first step, and there was no telling where it would take her. But for the first time in a long time, she was ready to find out.